Good morning, all. Welcome to crop selection in high tunnels. It's November 20th, 2014. My name is Liz Maynard, and as I said, the topic today is crop selection in high tunnels. This presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online at a later date at the through the Purdue Small Farms website. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and I'll try to get to them at the end of the presentation. But during the presentation, just so we can see things better, we'll be going to full screen and might not be able to see the chat box. So crop selection in high tunnels is in some ways certainly similar to crop selection in any growing environment. Many crops will produce in high tunnels. In terms of vegetables, which I'm most familiar with, if it'll grow outdoors in Indiana, it will very likely grow in a yield in a high tunnel. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's what you want to grow. Small fruits like strawberries and brambles have also been produced in high tunnels, and some people have good success with them. Herbs, cut flowers add even more options. But similar to choosing crops for production in the field, selecting crops to grow in a high tunnel is a decision best made in the context of the entire farm enterprise. And so before getting into the specific crops, I'd like to talk a little bit about that, some things to think about. What fits with your farm operation, what's profitable, and then what suits you. One of the first things to think about is what kind of high tunnel do you have? Often we might think a high tunnel is a high tunnel, but there are a number of different types. Some are really just good for growing for 3 seasons. The covering is removed in the winter. Others, you can grow in them for 4 seasons, and they're unheated. And then some people have a high tunnel that they might heat to just above freezing, and I would call that minimally heated. Some people would call that really just a greenhouse, because it has permanent heat, but some people, many of the growing conditions are similar to high tunnels, so it's often included in high tunnels. Here's some examples of those. This is one of the Haygrove brand type of high tunnels. It's not meant to support a snow load, and typically the plastic would be taken off that in the winter. These often cover large areas of ground. They may be a third of an acre or more. Sometimes a tunnel might be a 3-season tunnel just because the structure, the hoops, aren't strong enough. I'm not sure whether this one is strong enough to support a snow load or not. But with PVC hoops, it might or might not be. Here's another one with hoops that are spread quite far apart. This is probably another one that's not strong enough to support winter snow, depending on how much snow you get. Another reason for having a 3-season tunnel is if you may not have a source of unfrozen water in the winter. Winter crops don't need a lot of water, but they may need some, and if you don't have that, it could be difficult to grow in the winter. 4-season unheated tunnels. These are quite common. This is an example of one in Buffalo. These need to be designed to carry the snow load of whatever is going to happen in your area. So the design requirements would vary. Here's another one with some snow on it, showing why you need a stronger structure if you have snow. This one happens to have is one that has a The bows are Gothic arch, so the snow can slide off more easily than some other shapes. And this also shows the use of a row cover inside the tunnel, which is common when crops are grown through the coldest part of the year in tunnels that aren't heated. Sometimes a tunnel that doesn't have permanent heat might have some emergency heat, and this is an example of that. Oftentimes people find they might need some emergency heat or temporary heat for warm season crops if there's an unusually cold period in March or April after those crops are in. This isn't what we necessarily want to see for a full-time heater. So if you have a 3-season tunnel, you can grow during the warmer months of the year, but not throughout the winter. If you have a 4-season unheated or minimally heated tunnel, you can grow all year round. The other thing to think about is what can you sell or what can you market? Are the markets for direct, if you're selling direct to final consumers through a CSA or through a farmer's market or through a stand on your own farm, are those markets open? Do you keep your farm stand open all winter? Do you have a CSA that runs all winter? Do you want to have a CSA that runs all winter? Do you have winter farmer markets where you can sell? What if you're selling wholesale? Will you be getting the quantity consistently enough and the quality consistently enough to meet wholesale demands, whether that's selling to a restaurant, selling to a grocery store, selling to an institution? And what about local competitors? You may not have any. You may have other people who are growing similar things. How will that influence what you can sell? Not only local competitors, if you're selling greens in the winter, where are people who are buying those greens getting them from, if not from you? And are they going to be willing to buy them from you at the price you need? What's going to make someone choose your product over what they're already getting? One final concern about marketing is our food safety requirements. If you're growing a crop that you haven't grown before, or if you're selling it to different buyers, perhaps a wholesale buyer, a restaurant, an institution, do they have requirements for food safety that are new to you? If you haven't been selling wholesale before, there may be requirements that you haven't met before. If you're selling bagged leafy greens, there may be requirements that you haven't met before. So be aware of those and determine whether how you will meet those requirements. And then how does the crop fit in with the rest of what you're already doing? You certainly wouldn't be listening to this and thinking about this unless you're seriously thinking about or have already decided to use a high tunnel on your farm. So you've thought about adding this new activity, a new enterprise, new production system. And you've probably also thought about what else you'll need to add. Do you need more labor to actually help you do the work? Do you need more management, or will you have to spend more time in management, handling the scheduling, planning, managing people? If you're growing a new type of crop, are you going to need new facilities, new packing process, new storage facilities for that? Or are you going to have to use a facility that you normally use in the summer at a different time of year? How is that going to work? And then what's your knowledge base? What new information are you going to need? If you're growing a crop that you've already grown before, and you know about how to harvest, you know about how to grade it, certainly you'll have to learn particulars about growing it in a tunnel, but some of that knowledge is already there. But if it's a crop new to you, there will be some a knowledge base that you don't have. You'll have to spend time getting that or bring someone in who has it. And then you opportunity cost, in the sense of what won't you be able to do because you're doing this. Sometimes, because we're talking about season extension, growing things perhaps at a time of year that you haven't before, some people might assume, well, the additional work that you have to do is going to be before or after your normal growing season when you're not doing anything or anything much. But really take a close look at that. So you may very well be doing quite a bit in the off-season, planning, cleaning up, repairing equipment, perhaps going on vacation, taking a break, educating yourself by going to meetings or reading. Are you going to have to reduce the amount of time you spend on that if you have a tunnel? So all of this is really to remind you what you already know. Your operation and everything that you do is a unique system. It'll do best meeting your goals and your desires when it's considered as a whole and the different parts contribute to one another. Certainly another aspect of picking a crop is the financial aspect. And in field production, we often talk about gross or net profit per acre or receipts per acre. In a tunnel, the units are typically different. You can think about it as dollars per tunnel, so gross sales per tunnel, costs per tunnel, returns above costs per tunnel. Helpful if you're comparing across different, perhaps what you read in the literature, oftentimes things are reported as dollars per square foot. And then sometimes you may have multiple crops in a tunnel and they don't all take the same amount of time to mature. So in this picture you might be able to tell there's raspberries, there's something under the row cover which happens to be arugula, and then there's some tomatoes on the right. Well, those are each going to be in the tunnel for a different period of time. And so when figuring out the best mix of crops, people often go to dollars per square foot per week or per other unit of time, month, or something like that. So think in those terms as you're reading, getting information. Think of what terms will be useful for you and try to convert it to one basis so you can compare. Of course, be aware that the best information about financial aspects for you is going to be from your operation. There are some resources that give example budgets, but your numbers will be what really gives you the picture of your operation. And the more you can keep good records on that, the better off you'll be in terms of knowing what's going on. Finally, I want to just mention, I guess I had this as a title of what suits you. And this could be your personality, the way you like to do things. Some people, or some might prefer to get information on production from publications, websites, videos published by Extension and other organizations, talk to people who are already doing it, maybe follow a fairly clear set of recommendations and guidelines. If that's your preference, you may want to pick, you may be more comfortable picking crops that have a lot of that type of information available. Tomatoes are one example. That doesn't mean that we know everything about tomatoes, but it means it's fairly easy. There's quite a bit published about growing tomatoes in high tunnels. Another example might be if you're someone who thrives growing something new, You plant it, you dig in, you experiment with this, you experiment with that. You really get energized by the challenge of figuring out what that disease is, what that insect is, what's the problem here, what's the problem there, what's the best spacing, how do I exactly grow this. You may want to do something, be more energized by growing something that's a little more unusual. And in this picture there's some ginger here that's being grown. Not nearly as much information about that as there is, for instance, about tomatoes. And there's certainly other examples of specialty crops where there's not as much information about it. If you're someone who likes to dig that out, it can give you a competitive edge if you're successful at tweaking something and developing information that others don't have. But let's get down to the crops. Think a little bit about the year in a high tunnel. In a high tunnel that is built to withstand the snow load or winter conditions, and where you can have water to grow throughout the winter, you can grow throughout the entire year. But we usually think of dividing the growing season up into a warm season, cool season. At least for vegetables, we'll start with that. So for vegetables, in a high tunnel, the warm season vegetables are typically grown in our area from March to October, depending how far north and south you come. With a high tunnel, you get a little bit of protection from frost. You can get a little bit more if you have a row cover inside, but you still don't want to put the warm season vegetables out before that soil warms up in the tunnels, or much before the temperatures are averaging over 50, because they just won't grow and they don't do as well. It's a list of some of the warm season vegetables that are grown in tunnels, and I'll talk a little bit about each of them. There are certainly others. As I said, if you can grow it outside in Indiana, you can probably grow it in a tunnel. Tomatoes are, I would have to say, probably the most widely grown crop in high tunnels. That would means there's quite a bit of information out them, and it also means that there is potential for more competition. In this picture, you notice the soda cans on top of the stakes, and that is because these tomatoes will need to be protected by a row cover, and by if you just put a row cover over those posts, it would poke holes in the row cover, so those soda cans will protect the row cover from holes. That row cover is needed to protect from a frost, and it's not uncommon to need to do that in a tunnel, an unheated tunnel, early in the spring. Many different tomato varieties are grown successfully in tunnels and many different growing systems. So here's someone using a semi-determinate variety stake and weave system and having a successful production system with that. Here are some indeterminate or taller varieties also grown with a stake and weave system. Indeterminate varieties are also often grown with a pruned to one or two stems and attached to a vertical trellis. That's the system being used in this greenhouse. Some of the advantage of growing tomatoes in the tunnel, or some of the benefits you get from them, are earlier harvest in the spring, extended harvest in the fall if you keep the tomatoes through the summer. less cracking, and this can be particularly important on crack-prone varieties like the cherries that you see here, some of the heirloom varieties. And there's less of some diseases, foliar diseases, and in some cases more of other foliar diseases. And because if you're harvesting over a longer season, often you get higher yield because you're starting earlier. You may be continuing later into the fall. You can get a higher yield per plant. Another solanaceous crop that can be grown in tunnels is peppers, and in the foreground here you see some different types of peppers. You see some red bell peppers there growing. The plants can get fairly tall in the tunnel and often will need support. And in this photograph, this is from upstate New York, from a publication by Judson Reed at Cornell. You see peppers grown in, and they are staked. And that's, as the plants get big, that's often common. Another common practice for peppers grown in this manner in a high tunnel and similar to greenhouse production is that the early flowers may be pruned off so that the plant can get big enough to produce fruit. With peppers, there's been some, certainly not as widely grown probably, and it seems to be that the advantage may, or the benefit of growing peppers in a tunnel may be better for the colored peppers. They have a higher value. They take longer to produce. It can be, when you're growing the colored bell peppers outside, oftentimes some will rot or get insect damage before they're ready to harvest. That may be reduced in a tunnel. But the higher value means you can get more money for them. One report out of Iowa State indicated that returns for bell peppers in tunnels was fairly low. For colored bell pepper, that was for green bell peppers. For colored bell peppers, perhaps it's more. I haven't seen enough reports on it to know for sure, but it's certainly an option that people are looking at. The other crop that you see in this picture to the left are the cucumbers, and that's the next one I wanted to mention. Here are some cucumbers in a tunnel that are being trained to a trellis. Cucumbers can also be grown in a single string support system. This photo is courtesy of Shubin Saha when he was doing work at Southwest Purdue Ag Center. There's certainly different types of cucumbers. So the slicing or pickling cucumbers that are grown in the field can also be grown in a tunnel. They don't have as high a value, and so they may be grown on the ground in the tunnel. And if they're grown on plastic, they don't get as dirty. That may be an advantage. The higher value cucumbers, the seedless cucumbers, both the full size and the mini ones, often you can get more money for those when they're sold, and since the high tunnel is kind of precious real estate, and since those varieties can be readily strung up like this and produce well when strung up, it may be that those are a better choice for the tunnel. But it's important to be aware that for the cucumbers, to get good quality, they need to be harvested frequently, every day. And if that's not something that you can work into your plan, it may not be the best crop for you. The seedless types, like those shown here, they don't need bees to pollinate, and you would want to exclude bees from the tunnel so that you don't get the bees working the flowers. Other warm season crops, many other warm season crops could be grown in this slide. There you see okra on the right. This was at the Michigan State Experimental Tunnel in southwest Michigan. And on the left are some potatoes. Potatoes have a niche perhaps for new potatoes. They can be put in the tunnel early and then new potatoes harvested earlier than you would be able to outside, and that might be a good opportunity for instance selling to CSA or farmers market, where early new potatoes would be especially helpful. Other warm season vegetables that can be grown: eggplant, summer squash, zucchini, Irish potatoes, as I said, sweet potatoes, melons. A report from Iowa where they looked at economics indicated that eggplant had a high return per square foot because it had a high value per pound, and pounds per square foot was higher than, for instance, peppers. Summer squash and zucchini does quite well. You certainly need to make sure that pollinators are available, especially if your tunnel is closed in the early part of the season because of cool weather. You may need to bring in pollinators in order to get set. Melons is something that they can be grown, but it's not clear how practical they are or whether they're actually a profitable crop. I haven't seen any. I haven't seen wide growing of melons in tunnels, or even examples of successful small growing. But they can be grown, and there might be a niche market there if someone finds the right variety of specialty melon and the right way to grow it, the right market. We move into cool season vegetables. The months in blue here are where you might find cool season vegetables in a tunnel. So basically the whole year except for May, June, and July. And they're different. It's not that one vegetable would necessarily be in there for that whole period, but there may be succession plantings. Some will be maybe in there longer, some may be in there shorter. One thing to note is that some of these months overlap with the months for warm season vegetables. And that's something that everyone with a high tunnel has to make a decision about for their own farm. When it comes to be October and I still have my tomatoes in the tunnel, should I take them out so that I can get my cool season vegetables going? Should I take them out in September so I can get my cool season vegetables going? Those are the kinds of decisions that you'll have to make in your operation. There's some opportunity for interplanting, for planting cool season vegetables for a short time next to tomatoes, for instance. But there are times when the growth periods of the two might overlap. So with cool season vegetables, these are some of the main categories, and we'll go through examples of each of them. Baby leaf greens that could be used for a salad, or slightly different groups of them might be used in a stir fry. Some of the same leafy vegetables that are grown to a larger leaf, so you're selling a full-size leaf vegetables that form heads, root crops, and bulb crops. So these are some examples of the baby leaf greens that you might grow. These can be grown, and from the left we have lettuce, kale in the top middle. On the right are some Asian greens, tatsoi, mizuna, and some bok choy. And on the lower left are some mustards. So these are can be direct seeded densely, even more densely than you see here. It can be cut above the growing point, and then they will regrow, and after a number of weeks you can cut them again and get another harvest, and that can be repeated. When you get into the winter, the depths of the winter, they don't regrow very quickly, and so the time between harvests lengthens. And it's certainly possible to do multiple seedings of them, so you have them at different growth stages at one time. In picking the type and the varieties to grow, knowing your markets and their taste is key. So typically a mix of colors is appreciated by almost everyone, and the little salad in the lower right demonstrates how you get a mix of purples and different shades of greens and reds and so on. And most people will appreciate different shades of colors, it seems. But the spiciness and the cabbagey flavor of, for instance, kale, the spiciness of the mustards, not everyone appreciates those equally. So if you're making a mix, selling these, it's important to know what your customers will like. How much of a mustard do they want in their mix? If you're growing anything that has a bitter flavor, how much bitter does someone want in a salad mix? So many of these vegetables can also be grown to a bigger leaf size and either harvested as single leaves or the whole plant cut and harvested as a plant with leaves. This is an example of some Swiss chard that's not quite to the big leaf stage, but on its way. Some spinach that's been in a tunnel in the winter and could be harvested for larger leaves, or the whole plant cut for leaves. And similarly with kale or the mustards or the Asian greens, they could be harvested for larger leaves or the whole plant harvested. These are typically seeded or transplanted at a wider spacing than you would for the baby leaf greens, or they could be what's left behind after you thin out the baby leaf greens. Allowed to grow until the leaves reach a full size, and then the leaves harvested individually and bunched, or the entire plant harvested. If you're harvesting individual leaves, the plants will continue to grow and produce more leaves so that a single planting can be harvested over a period of time. If you cut the whole plant, obviously that's pretty much the end of it, and but then you could have that space to put in another crop. The head vegetables are also seeded or transplanted at a wider spacing. They're grown until they reach a full-size heads, and then the entire head harvested for sale. So head lettuces, Chinese cabbage, bok choy. Here's some Chinese cabbage in the background here, some lettuce. Here's some pak choy or bok choy harvested at when the heads are still fairly small, and the same heads a bit later, or heads from that same planting a bit later when they've reached up to a larger size. Other things that would be similar to this, where you're harvesting the whole plant after it's formed its head, might be things like broccoli. Kohlrabi doesn't really form a head, but you could wait till it gets its big bulb and then harvest it. This is some endive, escarole, and chicories that have been actually been in a tunnel over winter, and this was a tunnel that then was moved off of them, so they took all winter to make to get to the point where they're semi-heading. That's another example of a heading vegetable that can be grown. With the head vegetables, or the ones where you're growing till they're full size, they have one of the advantages they would have over the cut and come again for harvesting in the middle of winter is when you plant them, you try and grow them up to their full size before you get in the deep, dark, dead days of winter, and then there they are. And when it's in the dead of winter, they don't grow a lot, and so they will stay at that size for a while, and you can go in and harvest them. You don't have to rely on growth happening at that time as you might with a cut and come again vegetable, where you've cut it and you're waiting for it to regrow before you can harvest it again. Root crops are another cool season vegetable that works in high tunnels. Radishes are quick and produce nice radishes. You can sell the roots, and some people may also be interested in using the tops. They're generally direct seeded in late summer or fall, depending on how long it takes them to grow. Turnips take a little longer than radishes. Again, depending on the variety, you may have a variety that can be used for greens, or if you're looking at the root variety, there are some turnip varieties called salad turnips that can be are good eaten raw. You can also grow varieties that need to be cooked. Carrots also can be grown in tunnels. These take longer to grow and so need to be planted earlier in the late summer, early fall than the others if you're going to be harvesting them in the winter. There is also opportunity to plant them in the late winter and harvest them in the spring. So bulb crops, green onions, leeks, garlic, crops in the onion and garlic group. These can be the onions and so on would be seeded in late summer and then harvest when they get to the desired side. The garlic is planted in the fall, similar to what you would if you're planting it outdoors. Will come on earlier the next spring, and you may get larger garlic cloves and slightly earlier harvest the next year. This is some garlic in the early spring as it's coming up. Oops. Peas are a crop that also can be grown in a tunnel, either for pea shoots that are harvested just as the short shoots and sold for use in salad or stir fries. So the picture on the left, you can see some peas that were seeded in the ground, and you can see tendrils there that could be tendrils and leaves that could be cut. If left over winter, they can produce peas the next year that you can harvest, or you could also plant them in the spring and harvest peas. The picture on the lower right are some peas that were just seeded into a flat, grown for pea shoots. So that's not actually growing in the ground, but it's another way to grow a crop that could be harvested for pea shoots. One thing that's true about many of these cool season vegetables is that they are biennials, and they can be induced to flower if they get large enough and then go through a cold period. So on the large picture on the left there, you see several varieties of kale that all have started to flower. These are varieties that wintered over in a tunnel. They got plenty of chilling, and so in the spring they started sending up a flower stalk, bolting, and then flowering. You notice there's one variety there that isn't flowering. That's a lacinato kale right here. And so for an overwintered variety that won't flower so early in the spring, that would be something to look at. On the right is another example of something that has gone to flower. I don't know if you can see right in the center here of this tatsoi, there's a tiny little bud that looks like a broccoli bud. This was harvested in January. So this tatsoi had already started to flower, make its flower buds in January. It had already received enough cold weather to induce it to flower. So this is an issue with things in the cabbage family, so the kales, the Asian vegetables, the mustards. It can be an issue with the, well, I say other things in that family, the turnips, radishes, if you're leaving them that long, beets, not in the cabbage family, but beets will also be vernalized and send up a flower stalk. Carrots could do it, onions could do it. So be aware if you're holding things over the winter, as you get into the springtime when things start to grow and it warms up, they may be induced to flower. So moving on to small fruits, this is some other crops that people grow in high tunnels. I'm not as, don't work as much with small fruits as with vegetables. Strawberries that are I'll say for direct marketing sales, having berries out of the typical season seems to be very popular from what I understand. So when people tell me my CSA members were so happy to get strawberries or get raspberries at this time of year when they couldn't normally get them, they were so happy I was able to provide them. So I think there's a special niche for them. People seem to react well to berries. Strawberries are something that can be grown in a tunnel. There are both the day-neutral or ever-bearing varieties, and also the June-bearing varieties that can be grown in tunnels. The ever-bearing ones have the potential of a harvest over a period of several months. The June-bearing ones would typically come into harvest several weeks earlier than outdoors, but then they would finish harvest also earlier. Brambles, so raspberries and blackberries are another thing that can be grown. These will, depending on the variety that you have, they may be something that you leave in there for, that you plant in there the year before you're going to harvest. So if they're primocane fruiting, they'll be in there the year before you're going to harvest, and then you'll harvest the next year, and then you would leave them in there for a number of years. With the raspberries that will typically bear in the fall, they will, you can plant those in the spring and then harvest them in the fall, and then in the future years continue to harvest them. This will extend your fall harvest of berries. If the berries typically get frosted in the fall, having them under the tunnel will extend the harvest of them there. If you're growing a variety that typically fruits in the spring, you can get an earlier harvest in the spring. Other crops you can grow include cut flowers. And this is a small patch of cut flowers at the Southwest Michigan Research and Extension Center on the right. Advantages to growing cut flowers in a tunnel include that they often get much longer stems, which is desirable for cut flowers, and the flowers themselves are high quality because they're not so much damaged by the environmental conditions outdoors. Sometimes you can also get more stems per plant. Another example of some cut flowers in production. Both annuals and perennials can be grown in the structures. And another example of some flowers early in the spring. So the growing period for the cut flowers will vary depending on whether you're growing annuals or perennials. With the annuals, whether you're planting them at the beginning of the season or later in the season to get flowers to cut towards the end of the summer and the fall. One more class are perennial herbs. This is an example of rosemary grown in a tunnel. And in terms of value per square foot of the crops that they looked at in Iowa when they did the high tunnel budgets there, perennial herbs were one of the highest ones. Of course, you may not grow as many square feet of perennial herbs as you might of some of the other crops. But a single plant can provide a bit of yield. You may not need to devote a lot of space and yet still have some of that to offer to your markets. For any of the crops that we talk about, it's important to select varieties that are adapted to the tunnel as well as to your markets. I haven't gone into specific varieties in this presentation. For the more commonly grown crops, there are published variety trials from universities. So, for instance, for tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, some of the strawberries, I would look to some of the universities that have done this work that are kind of in our zone. Cornell in New York State, Penn State has done some, Iowa State, Missouri. We have some trials that have been done at Purdue. Seed companies, some seed companies focusing on this market have recommendations for which varieties work in a tunnel. I'd encourage you to become aware of that information, double check it with what you see published in the published variety trials. And then for any of these, there's if you are able to do your own on-farm trials, that will give you good information about what works in your system and for your markets, and I encourage you to do that. And then as you grow things, the better records you can keep, the more you'll be able to use that information to help you improve and fine-tune your system so it works. These are some of the items that will help you do that. We've been talking about different crops and kind of each crop individually, but certainly on a farm in a high tunnel, you'll be putting together a system where you may be growing more than one crop. Particularly if you're direct marketing or growing for a CSA or perhaps marketing to restaurants, you may want to have a mix of crops to offer. And how do you put all that together? How do you make it work for you? How do you time the planting? How do you make those decisions about whether to take out the tomatoes so that you can seed the fall crops? The information that you can pull together from that of the stuff that I just listed in the previous slide, that will help you determine what what is adding the most value to your operation, and will help you make decisions about how to put a system together that works on your farm. And that will conclude our presentation for today. We have some minutes for questions now. If you have questions and would like to type them, please go ahead. And happy to answer questions.